Thank you, Madam Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and representatives of civil society. It is my honor to address the Human Rights Council and to present the report on the activities of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention for 2023. Over the last 3 decades, the Working Group has issued almost 2,000 opinions on individual complaints. It has also sent hundreds of communications to governments and has conducted dozens of country visits. Its activities cover all regions of the world. As the Working Group holds its 100th session this year, it calls on governments to continue their cooperation with this important mandate. Madam Vice President, looking to the specifics of 2023, the Working Group adopted a total of 77 opinions concerning the detention of 173 persons in 39 countries. It transmitted 71 urgent appeals to 28 governments and other actors, and 111 allegation letters and other letters to 56 governments and other actors. These communications concerned at least 354 identified individuals. Some states informed the Working Group that they remedied the situations of those arbitrarily detained. We highlight that since last year's report, 38 individuals who were subject of our opinions were released. This represents a 65% increase from 2022. We continue to learn of further releases in 2024. We extend our gratitude to governments that released detainees subject to our opinions. However, such releases do not always imply the full implementation of our opinions. Madam Vice President, the Working Group continued to perform its mandate in a timely and efficient manner. It notes with concern the decline in the response rate from states under its regular communications procedure. In 2023, states provided a timely response in approximately 40% of cases, as opposed to 48% in 2022. We received follow-up information from either the source or government in approximately 69% of cases in which we adopted opinions. We call on all parties to continue providing comprehensive information on the implementation of our opinions, including on appropriate remedies and reparations to victims of arbitrary detention. In some instances, we received allegations of reprisals or intimidation against sources or subjects of our opinions. We recall and emphasize Human Rights Council Resolutions 12-2 and 24-24, which urge all states to prevent and refrain from all acts of intimidation or reprisals against those who sought to cooperate or had cooperated with the United Nations, its representatives, and its mechanisms in the field of human rights, or who had provided testimony or information to them. Furthermore, we noted the large majority of cases involved the detention of persons peacefully protesting and expressing their opposition to governmental policies. When a detention arises from the active exercise of these rights, this is a strong indication that it violates international law. In this context, the Working Group called upon states to end the use of detention as a tool against political opponents, dissidents, and other individuals exercising their civil and political rights. Madam Vice President, on thematic issues, we looked at mandatory minimum sentencing. In this respect, we first call on states to review legislation imposing such minimum terms. Judicial authorities should be able to assess the proportionality of sentences against the individual circumstances of the offender and the offending in question. Second, we reiterated that sentencing for drug-related offences should be proportionate. Courts should assess whether the offender had a lesser or minor role and whether he or she is a victim of human trafficking or was subjected to coercion, along with any other mitigating factors. Madam Vice President, let me now turn to the country visits undertaken in 2023. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention visited Mexico from 18 to 29 September 2023. There, we visited 4 federal and 11 state and municipal facilities. We enjoyed full and unimpeded access and conducted announced and unannounced visits and confidentially interviewed 173 persons in detention. We commended Mexico on several positive developments, such as the transition since 2008 to an adversarial and human rights-centered criminal justice model, improvements under the 2016 National Criminal Enforcement Act, the introduction of a national register of arrests and detentions, legislative amendments to limit the use of military courts, and the functioning of the National Human Rights Commission and State Human Rights Commissions, and the creation of the National Mechanism for the Prevention of Torture. At the same time, the working group noted that arbitrary detention continues to be widespread in Mexico. We identified several factors for attention, including the use of preventive custody without criminal charges, arraigo, the mandatory imposition of pretrial detention for a wide range of offenses, the militarization of public security at the federal, state, and municipal levels, the excessive use of force during arrests, and the lack of access to qualified legal assistance, including in cases concerning juveniles, the broad interpretations of flagrante delicto, the use of summary trial procedures, placing pressure on accused to plead guilty, punitive drug policies, attacks on judicial independence, and inadequate conditions of detention in several instances. We noted that arbitrary detention particularly affects indigenous peoples in Mexico, and that it is also widely used in the context of migration. The working group is seriously concerned about the de facto detention, in particular of migrant children. In the healthcare context, there is an absence of procedural safeguards for persons with psychosocial disabilities who are declared exempt from criminal liability. We extend our appreciation to the government of Mexico for the invitation and cooperation throughout the visit. We intend to continue our constructive dialogue with the government on the above-mentioned issues. Madam Vice President, from 27 November to 8 December 2023, the working group visited the Bahamas. It made both announced and unannounced visits to 10 facilities and was able to confidentially interview 134 persons deprived of liberty. The working group received unimpeded access to all places it wished to visit. It identified several positive developments, including the ratification of core international human rights treaties and the extension of a standing invitation to all special procedures. The tabling of a bill in 2023 to establish the Office of the Ombudsperson, the passing of the Mental Health Act, and numerous other legislative and regulatory initiatives. The establishment of the Parliamentary Human Rights Committee, and the admission of persons in need of assisted living to state care institutions on a voluntary basis. The working group observed, however, continuing challenges such as the widespread practices of arrests without warrant, the lack of timely judicial oversight of detention and allegations of police violence against detainees, potentially resulting in involuntary or unreliable confessions, the shortcomings of the bail system, including conditions that often exceed the financial means of suspects and their families, and the right of legal assistance being limited by financial means of the accused. The working group further observed that conditions of detention do not meet international standards, with pretrial detainees often held together with sentenced people, and criminal proceedings regularly subject to delays. The working group also expressed concern in relation to child and juvenile justice, as the age of criminal responsibility is not currently in line with international standards. Children are not afforded state legal aid, and those held at the Department of Correctional Services do not have access to regular educational and family visits. In the context of migration, we noted barriers to legal representation, interpretation, consular assistance, and access to asylum procedures. Finally, a lack of community-based services for persons with psychosocial disabilities has resulted in some individuals remaining institutionalized. We express our gratitude to the government of the Bahamas for the invitation and its cooperation throughout, and we again look forward to continued dialogue on the issues identified in our report. We welcome the invitations of Australia and the Republic of Korea to undertake visits in 2025, and we will present further findings on additional country visits to the Human Rights Council during upcoming sessions. Madam Vice President, while the working group continues to respond to as many requests for its action as possible, it faces an ongoing backlog of cases. The ability of the working group to deliver on its mandate has also been adversely affected by the United Nations financial crisis. We call upon states to continue supporting our work. That support is necessary, it's essential for us to be able to ensure adequate and predictable human resources to allow us to effectively exercise our mandate. Finally, Madam Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and representatives of civil society, the working group reiterates the call by the High Commissioner for Human Rights made on 4 January 2023 to end arbitrary detention once and for all. The working group calls on governments to take further steps necessary to remedy the situation of all individuals arbitrarily detained without delay. This includes ensuring their release and providing an enforceable right to compensation and other appropriate reparations. With that, I thank you, Madam Vice President.